Okay. I'm going to tell you a story. And this is a famous story from Australia. And it goes like this. Okay? Now, in the Dreamtime, there was a tiny little frog. And his name was Gurrukmun. And Gurrukmun gets his name, he's like Kookaburra. Kookaburra is, Burra is the person who goes Kooka. Do you remember that? And Gurrukmun is the person, Mun is the person who goes Gurruk. So Gurrukmun goes like this, he goes Gurruk, 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 Gurruk. Can you try that? Gurruk, 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 it sounds like a billabong. If you go next to a pond, that's a pond. If you go next to a pond, you hear all the frogs. Now, one night, Gurrukmun the Frog woke up and he was thirsty. So he decided to have a drink. So you know what he did? He started to drink. And the water tasted it was so beautiful, the water. And so he had another drink. That water was tasting better with each mouthful. He loved that water so much. It was just like kids on Halloween. When they get a little bit of candy, they can't stop. They've got to have more and more and more. Gurrukmun the Frog could not stop drinking, and he drank and he drank until he drank the entire pond, the billabong, and he put it in his little green belly that was starting to get bigger and bigger and bigger. Gurrukmun the Frog had drunk the entire billabong and he was still thirsty. So Gurrukmun the Frog went to the river and he decided to drink the entire river and put it in his belly. Gurrukmun the Frog drank the river and the billabong and he was still thirsty. So Gurrukmun the Frog went to the lake and he decided to drink the entire lake. Now his body was starting to get pretty big by now. Gurrukmun the Frog drank the billabong, the lake, and the river. And Gurrukmun the Frog was still thirsty. Gurrukmun the Frog hopped over to the next lake. The next billabong. The next river. And he drank all the water across the whole land. He could not stop. And Gurrukmun the Frog had drunk all the water on the land in the whole world this one night in the Dreamtime. And Gurrukmun the Frog was still thirsty. Gurrukmun the Frog, his body went up to the tallest mountain. He was that big by now. His body was just like a big balloon. And Gurrukmun the Frog was still thirsty. There was only one thing left for Gurrukmun the Frog to drink in the entire world. The ocean! Who said that? He drank the ocean. Gurrukmun the Frog went up to the ocean and he took a deep breath and he decided to drink the entire ocean and put it in his belly, and it was starting to get bigger. Gurrukmun the Frog had drunken all the water in the whole land, and he was so full there was only one thing left for him to do, but Gurrukmun the Frog went to sleep. It was just like Thanksgiving. He had so much water in his belly, and his belly now went up into the clouds. He was so huge. Now in the morning, all the kids woke up, and the birds and the animals, and they went to the lakes, the rivers, the billabongs. There was no water in the morning because you always need a drink in the morning. And they looked at each other and said, something's wrong. And then they saw this huge green body of Gurrukmun. It went right up into the clouds. And all the kids started to run with the birds and the animals, and they ran over to that huge body. And they looked up and they realized that all the water in the whole world was in his belly. And they called a meeting just like this. And some of the kids said, well, if we don't get any water, what's going to happen to us? We could die. So they called a meeting, and this is when the wise old wombat came up to the meeting. He came up and they said, Wombat, tell us what to do. And Wombat said, well, why don't we put all our heads together? Let's brainstorm and see if we can come up with an idea. How are we going to get the water back from Gurrukmun the Frog? His body is so huge. Has anybody got any ideas? Pop his belly open. What do you think?
Burp.
He could burp. We could burp him.
We can blow him up.
We could blow him up.
We can open his mouth up.
We could tell him to open his mouth up.
We can cut him open.
We could cut him open. And cut him open. And Wombat said, hang on. He said, these are really good ideas, but I've got an idea. Why don't we, the first thing we do before we try anything is why don't we just ask him first to give the water back? And all the kids went, that's a good idea. Let's just ask him. So all the kids at the same time, they went like this. Gurrukmun, please give us back the water. Can you try it with me? Gurrukmun, please give us back the water. He didn't even wake up. So we have to do it a bit louder. Let's try it a little bit louder. Please give us back the water. And Gurrukmun sat up there. He was so sleepy, so they said, Wombat, it didn't work. What do you think we should do? And then the Wombat said, I've listened to all your ideas, and I think the best idea that one of the people came up with was if we can make Gurrukmun laugh, then maybe he'll do what we call, he'll start to laugh, and he'll do in Australia what we call a chuckle belly. And when you get a chuckle belly, you know when you get the giggles, you can't stop giggling. And if you get the giggles, then there's no way Gurrukmun will be able to keep the water in his belly. So they said, that's a really good idea. So the first person who came up was the kangaroo. And he said, I'll do my funniest hops. So the kangaroo did his funniest hops. And then the emu came up and he said, I'll do my funniest walks. So then the emu did his funniest walks. And he went like this, touching the ground really gently. And everybody was laughing. They thought this was really good. But Gurrukmun was still asleep. And then the kookaburra, he came up and he said, I'll tell him my funniest jokes. And so Gurrukmun went up to the ear of, so the kookaburra went up to the ear of Gurrukmun. And then he said to Gurrukmun like this while he was asleep, he said, Gurrukmun, have you ever heard the joke about Cuckoo, Kakakakoo, Cuckoo, Kakakakoo, Kakakakoo? And all of a sudden, Gurrukmun, he opened his eyes and he started to laugh. He thought that was really funny. All the water went out of Gurrukmun's mouth and it went back into the lakes, the rivers, the billabongs. And Gurrukmun the frog went down into a tiny little green sand frog the way he started. And he looked up and he saw everybody looking at him, and he was so embarrassed about stealing all the water that he quickly hopped over to a billabong and he jumped in. And ever since that day, that greedy frog, Gurrukmun, has never been seen very much. You hear him at night, but you hardly ever see him during the daytime. And all his ancestors, the frogs, are the same. You hear them at night time, but you hardly ever see them because they've been embarrassed by their ancestor, Gurrukmun, the greedy frog who stole all the water in the Dreamtime. And if you go to that country to this day, if you go to Australia, and you go up to the north of Australia, and you see these tiny little green sand frogs, you know, they're still greedy. You know what they do when the billabongs dry up, which they do every year, because we have a wet season and a dry season. And your parents will show you this. They dig a little tunnel, and when there's a tiny little bit of water left, the last bit of water left in the billabong, they dig a tunnel and they drain all the water down and they make a cave, and then they drink all the water, they fill their bellies, and they fall asleep. And then they wait for the rains to come, okay? Now your parents will show you one day when you're thirsty, they'll say, I'll show you how to get a drink of water, okay? And you'll go to that billabong and you'll see a little damp patch and you'll be able to dig down and you'll be able to get one of those frogs and you just squeeze their stomach because they're asleep and you get yourself a drink of water. And one day, your mum or your grandma might be really sick and they're going to say to you, could you get me a drink of water? And you'll say, I remember that story and I know how to find those frogs. And you'll be able to run off, you'll be able to dig down, you'll be able to get one of those frogs and you'll be able to take it back to your grandma and squeeze it into her mouth. And you could save your grandma's life because of that story.
Oh, okay, I guess I can do that. Okay.
You guess you could do that?
I can do that.
Give yourselves a round of applause. Thanks for listening.